Hello everyone. I made a video last month promoting my daughter's book, Double Lives by Helen McCarthy, which I mention again just in case I haven't mentioned it enough already. And it was meant to be a one-off, but I had lots of people saying, come on Elaine, do some more, talk about other things. So I thought, okay, I'll have a crack at it. So today, what I want to talk about is one of my abiding interests, and that's the golden age of crime. I've always loved detective novels, particularly this period, which is the golden age between the two world wars. And when I think of the golden age of crime, I think of three people: Agatha Christie, Ngaio Marsh, and Dorothy L. Sayers. Now, I'm well aware there are plenty more, but for me, those three are the ones that I love the most. I've tried Marjorie Allingham, and though I admire her writing, I'm afraid I don't care for her detective very much. There's something about her books that I don't get on with. Gladys Mitchell's books I didn't like, and Gervais Finn, who is the main protagonist in the books of Edmund Crispin, is just insufferable. But others will disagree. Now, I first read Agatha Christie when I was about 11 or 12. I was at home suffering from German measles, and my sister brought me some books to read, and amongst them was a book that's now called And Then There Were None, but had a much less politically acceptable title then. And I read it, and I was totally hooked, and I've been reading crime novels ever since. I only discovered Dorothy L. Sayers fairly recently, about 7 or 8 years ago, which I'm delighted about because it gave me something new to read. And then I received an email one day from the marketing director of the British Library. And he said, Elaine, I notice you like detective novels, and the British Library is starting a series of classic British crime. Would you be interested in receiving any copies? Well, of course, my immediate reaction was gimme, 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 but I wrote back very politely and said I would love some. And lovely British Library have been sending them to me ever since, so thank you. The first one, it was on a different cover, and they reissued it in hardback later on when it was successful, was The Santa Claus Murder by Mavis Doriel Hay. And I read it, and I enjoyed it, and I went on to read more. Now, I have to say that I think some of these writers have been forgotten for a very good reason. And I can't say that I've been enamoured of all of the authors that have been reprinted. I'm not going to say what they are, because just because I don't like them doesn't mean that others won't. And I have to say that the writer I have discovered that I've enjoyed the most is Freeman Wills Croft. Now, golden age aficionados will sneer and say, good Lord, has that stupid woman never read any of them before? Well, I hadn't. So they sent me 12:30 from Croydon, followed by The Hogsback Mystery, Antidote to Venom, and Mystery in the Channel. Now, I was having lunch with a friend of mine, and I said to her, I've just discovered Freeman's Wills Croft. So when I turned up at the venue, she presented me with a carrier bag, and in it were 20 books by Freeman Wills Croft, old editions, some out of print, some worth quite a bit of money. And she entrusted me with them, and I took them home, and I read them over a period of 2 months. So thank you, Jan. I appreciated it very much. She said that they satisfied her inner pedant, and I can see why. Freeman Wills Croft has Inspector French as his main protagonist. He's not a daring-do kind of man. He's not an Inspector Allain. He's not an Hercule Poirot. He plods, and he gets things done, and he sits and thinks. And the minutiae, there was one called Death of a Train, and we had to work out things about nuts and bolts and phalanges and fiddly bits, none of which made any sense to me at all, but were enormously satisfying. And in the one Mystery in the Channel, we had pages about tides, and if a body was dropped here and a boat came here, could it pick it up there? Now, if you don't like this sort of thing, don't read them, but they're absolutely wonderful. I've tracked them all down, I've read them all, save 3, which are quite tricky to get, and when you can get them, they're inordinately expensive. So I'm going to write to British Library and say, please, please, please publish these and save my purse. Now, the next one I like very much, E.C. Lorac. Several of those. Murder in the Mill Race I'm really pleased about, because it was me that suggested it to the British Library, and they said, oh, we've never heard of that one. So they published it. Now, whether they did it because I wrote to them or not, I don't know, but I'm claiming the credit. But E.C.R. Lorac is also Carol Carnac. And Carol Carnac is the pen name of Caroline Rivet, who was born in 1894 and died in 1958. These Golden Age writers all wrote under different names. It gets very confusing after a while. There are Inspector MacDonald is the inspector for Lorac, and he reminds me a bit of Roderick Alleyn of Nio Marsh, which is no bad thing. As a Scotsman, I like him very much. Carol Carnac doesn't have a regular detective, not that I've spotted anyway. And I freely admit that some of these books under her name I haven't liked very much, but this one is brilliant. There's a dead body in London, burned beyond recognition, and a clue leads the inspector. Who is it in this one? I can't remember. Anyway, the inspector and his sidekick realise that the murderer has to be amongst a party of skiers who've gone to Austria. And off they go. Now, we get to know all these skiers, and I thought, he did it. It's obvious, but then the obvious doesn't always happen. They may want me to think that because it's so obvious, but then they might want me to think that because it's so obvious. They want me... Anyway, you get the drift. Anyway, I have to tell you now that I got the murderer totally wrong, but they are really, really worth reading. Now, another writer, George Bellairs, who's totally new to me. Now, I've taken a few notes here. Now, George Bellairs was a nom de plume, see another name, of Harold Blundell. He was a bank manager, and he remained a bank manager all his life, and he said he wrote these books to pay for treats like holidays. He's been described as minor but prolific and humdrum, which I think is rather sad, because listen to this. This is from one of his books. The early morning was dull and the waterfront chilly, and over the water hung a thin mist. From Elmer's Creek the coast swept into the wide, flat, desolate expanse of Ballback Bay. Fishing boats in the river, a noisy dredger busy keeping the channel clear, and across the wide expanse of sandbanks men were gathering shrimps and digging for cockles. The police pulled up at the Terminus Hotel. Its main purpose finished, the hotel was empty, forlorn and shabby, and gave one the impression of having innumerable closed rooms and vast empty corridors full of rotting furniture and smelling damp and decay. Well, I don't know about you, but I find that positively Dickensian. He has an inspector called Inspector Littlejohn, who has a great deal in common with French, Inspector French. Not dashing by any means, but gets on with things. A lot of his books are now available not only with the British Library, but on e-books and on Kindle, and he's written an awful lot. Some are not as good as others, but if you've written about 50 or 60, you're going to have a bad day. But they're well worth reading. Okay. Gosh, I'm motoring through all these. I hope you're still with me. Alan Melville. Alan Melville was a television broadcaster, as well as a playwright, producer and scriptwriter. He died in 1983. These are huge fun. Quick Curtain, Death of Anton, and Weekend at Thrackley. Again, nobody no regular detective. Huge fun, wittily written. And there's a slight anomaly here because, unless this has changed, when I had a discussion with Martin Edwards, who I'll mention in a moment, about the books here, the covers, which are superb, they are absolutely wonderful. They're all sourced from posters and pictures of the time. This one wasn't. Death in Anton was a commissioned cover, and oddly enough, it didn't sell as well as the others. Just a thought. Okay, I'm going to stop in a few minutes, but before I go, I have to mention Martin Edwards, who is the editor of this series and who is responsible for whole collections of short stories set on trains, on the coast, in country houses, all of which are fascinating. One of them actually has a short story, a mystery story with E.M. Delafield in it, the lady who wrote Diary of a Provincial Lady. Anyway, about 4 or 5 years ago now, this book, The Golden Age of Murder, was written by Martin Edwards. And it is absolutely fascinating. It's a history of the crime club, the detective stories, the members of it, the background of everybody. Who remembers this on the front of Crime Club? I've still got some old Crime Club covers with this on. Wonderful. And finally, the story of classic crime in 100 books by Martin Edwards. You can see I've still got all my stickers in it. Published by the British Library. An absolutely wonderful cover. And in it, he talks about 50 of famous crime books. Look at those wonderful illustrations and talks about them. This is my Bible. He has explored the evolution of the genre through these books, through 100 books. And through this I have discovered so many more writers that I never knew of, which perhaps I'll talk about another time, but I think perhaps we've had enough for today. So, the British Library Classic Crime Series. Absolutely wonderful, well worth exploring. The only drawback really is that it has stopped me spending hours in dusty, dirty second-hand bookshops looking for crime novels, because now they are easily available. Though that Martin Edwards book with the 100 has sent me off with a whole list of new names, and when I was in Norfolk last year I stumbled across 2 gems in a little book in Cromer. So you know, the joy of hunting for books we want is still there. Okay, well this is the end of my second video, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you very much. Leave comments, feedback, I would love it. Goodbye everybody.